Hello again, everyone. Edwin Learnard back once again. In this YouTube astrological segment, I'm going to be talking about the natal chart of the legendary singer Elvis Presley. Now, as far as Elvis Presley goes, obviously a renowned singer, and I believe he did a lot of very good dancing when he was on stage. It's interesting when you look at his chart. Okay, he has the Sun in Capricorn, Moon in Pisces, and a Sagittarius ascendant. Now, the Sun in Capricorn, of course, could be about all business and the career ambitions. And interestingly enough, okay, then that seems to be injected into the Pisces moon energy, a lot of it in filmography. I believe he was in some movies and also dancing. And given that he has Sagittarius rising, this, of course, could very well then be flavored with a lot of expansive, exuberant, and enthusiastic energy. Now, it's interesting when you look at his sun sign in Capricorn in contrast to the ascendant. I mean, you're talking about, I know they're not in opposition, but the energy is almost everything diametrically opposed. You have the sun in Capricorn is about premeditation, prudence, and discretion and caution, and all this premeditation plan energy. And then you have the Sagittarius, and really, and it's very introverted too, and introspective. Sagittarius is almost just the opposite, very jocular, jovial, expansive, and very optimistic and positive. And Capricorn energy, of course, could be really negative and depressive. So, and pessimistic. So I thought that was very interesting. It shows that his Sagittarius ascendant really was so strongly different than what he had in terms of his, as far as his conscious, his basic character, which is the sun in Capricorn and the moon in Pisces, the unconscious, nature that he has. And, really it's just a lot of, the hidden personality, the moon in Pisces. But the thing about it is, sadly, I do think that the drug use was somewhat tied into his moon in Pisces, and also conjunct his Saturn. And of course, when you have Saturn conjunct your moon, it can give some difficulties and some connection in sorrow and sadness, and connection with something that could have been an emotional need. And in this case, it may have manifested in the drugs. But looking at Elvis Presley, though, in terms of going back, looking at his general natal chart, pictorial look, okay, he had like 6 planets on the bottom half of the chart, 4 on the top, I believe. So it would show a little bit more introversion, introspective nature, as opposed to being outgoing and gregarious. But at the same time, that was just a slight difference. You're talking, I believe, what was a 6-to-4 disparity in terms of the planets. Like there were 6 on the bottom, 4 on the top half. And he was certainly, one that wasn't going to shy away from the spotlight. I think a nickname for him was Elvis Pelvis. It's interesting because he's got the South Node in Leo conjunct Pluto in his chart in the 8th house. And you have the South Node in Leo. It shows South Node astrology can be connected with their natural attributes and abilities. And I mean, South Node in Leo can have a natural ability for flamboyancy, for attention getting, for notoriety, exposure, and recognition. And then having it by Pluto, it's not really surprising that he was known for that nickname. If I'm not mistaken, you might want to look and look that up, but I believe he had that nickname, Elvis, Elvis the Pelvis. And then he has it, of course. The thing about that too, though, on a negative side, with his South Node in Leo conjunct his Pluto, I think negatively, in being in the 8th house, that could have indicated maybe he needed to get away from extravagance, being manipulated maybe by others through extravagance, and through being generous, really being, because you're talking about Leo energy can be somewhat gullible. It can be very generous and magnanimous, and you have it. The South Node conjunct Pluto indicates that he may have needed to get away from that gullibility, maybe being manipulated by others, being in the 8th house of shared resources. It wouldn't surprise me if Elvis had a number of people that may have been using him in terms of money, and as far as his resources went, as far as that energy goes. And the thing about it is, too, when I look at his chart too, and looking at what things that happen in terms of his death. I mean, his death to a lot of people is very nebulous and unclear and confounding. I believe he did likely truly die. There's all speculation, conjecture. Did he fake his death? It's interesting because he had transit Neptune on his ascendant when he did pass away, and based on these pathologists and what people have concluded, a number of people have ascertained, conclude at least in their perception, that this was something at least connected with drugs one way or another, whether it's through prescription or some recreational drug, something that was drug related affected the physical vitality, and which of course that's the ascendant. The physical body is the ascendant. Sagittarius of course doesn't do anything on a small scale. He also had transit Pluto, very close proximity to his natal Mars at the time, and that could indicate in astrology that could be the obliteration or destruction of one's vitality and energy. I believe also Elvis had some issues with diabetes. He has Mars in Libra, and then transit Pluto was by that Mars, and also the transit North Node was not far from his natal Mars at that time. So a lot of this could have been about having to, when you're talking about the North Node being involved in transit, a lot of that can be connected with energy that one must have to confront, and he may have had to confront some issues with obliterated, really destroyed vitality at this time, and also maybe some physical issues that were tied in with diabetes, because diabetes again connected with Libra, so you might have had some issues. That's how that may have manifested at that time. Now, and the fact remain, and also too, he also had been believed was suffering from an enlarged colon. Elvis Presley had Jupiter in Scorpio conjunct his 12th house of secret sorrows and endings, and the thing and limitations and restrictions. Now, Jupiter in astrology, as I've stated in previous videos, can be rather paradoxical, could be very strongly benign and benevolent, but it could also have a tendency to enlarge and expand. And Scorpio can be is connected with the colon. So I mean, Jupiter can be about enlargement. That may have played a role in an enlargement of the colon, and it also is the ruler of his first house of the physical body. And again, it was conjunct his 12th house cusp. In Elvis Presley's chart, he also has on his 12th, 6th house cusp and axis, he has them in critical degrees. He has Scorpio at 21 degrees on the 12th house cusp of endings, and he also has, and then of course the opposite on his 6th house cusp, 21 degrees Taurus. And he did have some issues, according to something on Wikipedia.org, some commentary from somebody that stated he had, so when he was singing in June, I believe 1977, that you could barely, he could, his trouble articulating or something, or he was barely able to sing, and, his voice was really not nearly as loud or vociferous as it had been previously. And of course, Taurus can be connected with the voice and the vocal cords. And at this time as well, I want to go back, going back to his natal chart as far as Elvis Presley goes. He does have in his natal chart Pluto and Cancer in the 8th house. Now, my understanding is he died, I believe it was at home, or at least in a home, and somebody in being in the 8th is interesting, because what happened with him is that apparently, not to be overly graphic with this, but he was on, he was sitting down on, going to the bathroom based on the position he was found in, and he was laying on the ground, comatose, I believe, and laying there basically in a frozen state. And it's interesting because, the 8th house, of course, can be connected with, with excretion, not being overly graphic, but it's not surprising that his death was tied into something connected with this, and there was at least speculation there may have been some issues with constipation at that time when he had died. And the 8th house, of course, is connected with those kind of things, excretion and in constipation. 8th house is the house of Scorpio, and it's just terrible that the way that this panned out, sadly, for Elvis. And Again, you have all this, nebulous and unclear energy connected with Elvis when he passed away. And again, a lot of that I think was attributed to the fact that transit Neptune was very close proximity to his ascendant, the physical body, at the time that he passed. Now, there was also issues with an enlarged heart for Elvis when they did like the autopsy, and they conclude when you were getting conclusions on his passing. And at that time, he had transit Saturn in Leo near his black moon Lilith in Leo in the 8th house. And of course, Leo energy can be about issues that are associated with the heart. And when you have the black moon Lilith energy involved in Saturn could be about restrictions and despondency and sorrow, debilitation, and of course you got the black moon Lilith can be connected with suffering and tribulation. So it's not surprising he had transit Saturn that close to his black moon Lilith. It gave more sorrow and sadness in connection with that black moon Lilith energy, and he did die, in according to the reports, at least what these pathologists said, or whoever concluded this, that there was something heart related in connection with his passing. And having Virgo on his 10th house cusp, it told me that Elvis wanted to be, really, he had the public image reputation of being that perfectionist, of wanting to get things done flawlessly. And really, it's not really, looking at his chart and everything with this chart, with the transits and natally, it's not surprising that he passed and sadly in the manner that he did. But at the same time, looking at this as well, I believe likely, I haven't looked at his progress chart, but based on the position being the zodiac sign Cancer on his 8th house cusp in his natal chart, he likely had Leo on the 8th house cusp in the progress chart, and that could indicate at that time, if a person passes, it can be something Leo related. And again, he had the enlarged heart issue when he did pass away. And another thing I noticed that was interesting, as far as a transit and how it might have been tied in with his death and demise, is that at the time he passed away, he also had, I believe, transit Mercury close to his natal Neptune. Now you're talking, when he passed away, there was at least one conclusion, that it was somehow connected with something with the central nervous system that was drug related. Now, I don't know if I don't remember, if it was pharmaceutical drugs or what kind of drugs they were, but of course Neptune can be connected with drugs, and Mercury is associated with the central nervous system. Hold on a moment, people. Sorry about that, I'm back. But anyway, there's really not much more I wanted to add as far as Elvis goes. It just, as far as his natal chart goes, it just terrible that he did. I know some of you, think maybe he's still alive, but I believe that he likely is. He is gone, sadly. And it's just important to remember, not just what happened when he passed, but how he lived, and that he was just such a phenomenal talent. He had Uranus in his 5th house. It was either in his 5th house or close to his 5th house cusp, one way or another. That I honestly don't remember. But that being said, it was also a singleton planet. It was the only planet he had in a fire sign, so it made it stand out a little more, I believe, and it gave him this really near maybe genius ability in entertainment, and that he was just somebody, maybe that was far ahead of his time, and he was such a transcendent talent at that, in terms of what he did in terms of the entertainment world. He also had the ruler of his 10th house, Mercury, was conjunct his sun at the time. Not at the time, in his natal chart, he has Mercury conjunct his sun. It's the 10th house ruler, so it's not surprising he was in a career in which he was able to shine. He also had some there was some glaucoma he was dealing with as well, and he has Pluto opposite his sun in his natal chart, and also I think sun of course is the left or right eye depending on gender, and he also has the moon in Pisces conjunct Saturn. And I mean, you're talking about the moon. Moon astrology is the left or right eye depending on gender. And if you have it conjunct Saturn, sometimes this could be about some limitations or some difficulties, debilitations with that, with an eye. And it's really, and you're talking about Neptune, I mean, sorry, Pisces energy involved. That could be about dissolving and dissipation. I think having the Pluto oppose his natal sun in Capricorn, coupled with the fact Saturn conjunct his natal moon, there's no surprise that he had some issues with his eyes. So anyway, people, that'll conclude this YouTube astrological segment for my take on the natal chart of Elvis Presley. And until next time, people, Edwin Learnard saying stay well.